The most effective corporate fraud detector isn't an auditor or a regulator, it's a whistleblower. And on a rain-lashed November night, in the empty silence of a 43rd floor office, a janitor named Michael Vale was about to become one. He was just trying to clean the CEO's desk. He wasn't supposed to see the document left face up under the lamp, the one that outlined a $200 million lie. Michael was a single father, not a forensic accountant. His world was defined by early mornings, his daughter's soccer games, and the quiet rhythm of emptying trash bins after hours. But that document, labeled Project Chimera, detailed a scheme so vast, it threatened to collapse the entire company. And the only person who could expose it was the man paid to clean the floors. He had a choice: slide the paper back where he found it, or walk out with proof that could destroy a billionaire CEO. He made his choice, and by sunrise, she knew he had it. Michael Vale's life was measured in shifts. The day shift belonged to his 10-year-old daughter, Chloe, making breakfast, walking her to the bus stop, trying to explain fourth-grade math that had changed its rules since he was a kid. The night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., belonged to the gleaming, empty tower of Vance Biotech. His world was one of echoing marble lobbies, the chemical tang of industrial glass cleaner, and the soft hum of server banks in locked rooms he was trusted to enter but never question. He had been part of the night crew for 4 years. It was stable. The health insurance was decent. It allowed him to be home when Chloe got off the bus. That was the calculus. The trade-off was a permanent ache behind his eyes from the fluorescent lights and a silence so profound during the midnight hours that you could hear your own heartbeat. He knew the rhythms of the building better than he knew the rhythms of his own apartment. He knew which floorboards on the 39th floor groaned. He knew that Mr. Armitage in legal always left a half-eaten protein bar in his top drawer. And he knew that the CEO, Althea Vance, never left anything out of place. Her office was a sanctum on the 43rd floor, all cool glass and curated modern art. Her cleaning instructions were explicit and laminated: dust with a microfiber cloth, never spray polish directly on the Danish walnut desk, empty the shredder bin twice nightly. She was a phantom presence, known through discarded espresso cups and the faint, expensive scent of neroli that lingered in the air. Her face was on the cover of business magazines in the lobby. The gene-editing visionary, they called her. Vance Biotech's stock had tripled in 3 years on the promise of a revolutionary cancer therapy. The night he found the document, a Tuesday in November, began like any other. He'd already cleaned the labs on 41, the cubicle farms on 42. He used his master key on the double doors to the executive suite at 1:17 a.m. The room was dark, lit only by the city's glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He moved on autopilot, emptying the wastebasket, wiping down the glass conference table. He approached her desk. That's when he saw it, a single manila folder left squarely in the pool of light cast by her desk lamp. It was deliberate, not tucked away, not in a drawer. It was as if someone had been reviewing it and was interrupted. The tab read, Project Chimera Internal Audit Findings. Below that, stamped in bold red letters, Eyes Only Counsel. Under normal circumstances, Michael would have looked away. You developed a kind of trained blindness in this job. You saw nothing. You heard nothing. You were part of the furniture. But a single line, visible where the folder had fallen slightly open, caught his eye. It was a bullet point. Discrepancy between FDA trial data and internal biomarker logs, 100% variance. His hand paused, the microfiber cloth hovering above the walnut surface. 100% variance. That didn't sound like a rounding error. That sounded like 2 different realities. He shouldn't. Every instinct honed over 4 years told him to close the folder, finish his work, and move on. But he thought of Chloe. He thought of the headlines, the soaring stock, the hope attached to this company's name. He thought of 100% variance. His fingers, calloused from handling trash bags and chemical buckets, touched the edge of the folder. He opened it. The first page was an executive summary. The language was dense, legalistic, but the gist was unmistakable. Project Chimera wasn't a cancer therapy. It was a financial illusion. The report alleged that Althea Vance, with the help of her chief financial officer, had been systematically fabricating patient trial results. They had created a parallel set of laboratory records showing miraculous recovery rates, while the real data, buried in a separate encrypted server, showed the treatment was ineffective and in some cases harmful. The purpose? To inflate the company's valuation ahead of a massive secondary stock offering scheduled for the following week. $200 million was on the line. The numbers blurred in front of him. He saw flowcharts of shell companies, invoices from fake clinical research organizations, and transfer records to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. It was a spiderweb of deceit, all leading back to the elegant signature at the bottom of several authorization forms. A. Vance. The air left the room. The hum of the city outside faded to a distant buzz. Michael Vale, a man who balanced his checkbook to the last dollar, who saved coupons, who felt a twist of anxiety when Chloe needed new sneakers, was holding proof of a $200 million fraud. The weight of it was physical. This wasn't a mistake. This was a blueprint. He heard the soft ping of the elevator arriving in the reception area outside. His blood went cold. No one came up here after midnight, ever. He snapped the folder shut. His eyes darted around the office. The only exit was through the door he'd just entered, which led directly to the reception where the elevator doors were now sliding open. He heard the crisp click of heels on marble. Althea Vance's voice, sharp with irritation, carried through the door. "I don't care what time it is in Zurich. Get him on the line. This can't wait." Michael was trapped. The folder was in his hands, a burning piece of evidence. He looked at the large, abstract painting on the wall behind the desk. On a desperate impulse, he slid the thin manila folder behind the heavy canvas frame, pressing it flat against the wall. He snatched up his cleaning cart just as the office door swung open. Althea Vance stood silhouetted in the doorway. She was taller in person, her auburn hair a sharp frame for a face that was all angles and intensity. She wore a rumpled blazer, as if she'd been working for days without leaving. Her eyes, a flinty gray, locked onto him with an annoyance that quickly morphed into a cold, assessing scrutiny. She didn't see a person. She saw an obstacle. "You're in here late," she said, her voice devoid of the charm she used in television interviews. "Standard cleaning shift, ma'am," Michael said, keeping his head slightly down, playing the part of the invisible worker. She walked past him, her gaze sweeping her desk. She looked for something. Her eyes narrowed slightly when she didn't find it. She went to her computer, waking it with a tap. The screen illuminated her face in a pale blue light. She was searching. Michael slowly pushed his cart toward the door, every muscle in his back screaming that he was walking away from a lit fuse. "Janitor," she said, not turning around. He stopped. "Yes, Miss Vance. Did you empty my shredder bin tonight?" "Yes, ma'am, about 20 minutes ago." "Where is the bag?" "It's on my cart. It gets compacted in the service elevator." She finally turned to look at him. Her eyes traveled from his face to the cart, to the clear plastic bag full of confetti-like paper strips. "Leave it," she said. "Procedure is." "I am rewriting procedure," she cut in, her voice a whiplash. "Leave the bag now." He had no choice. He lifted the heavy plastic bag from his cart and placed it on the floor by her desk. She gave a curt nod, dismissing him. As he pushed his cart out, he heard her tear into the bag, the frantic rustle of paper as she began sifting through the shredded contents. She wasn't looking for just anything. She was looking for the document he had just hidden behind her painting. He rode the service elevator down to the basement loading dock, his heart hammering against his ribs. The cold night air hit him like a slap. He leaned against the brick wall, the events of the last 30 minutes crashing over him. He had seen the crime, he had hidden the evidence, and she knew it was missing. The billionaire CEO and the janitor were now locked in a silent, desperate race. He had the proof, and she had everything else: the power, the lawyers, the resources to make him disappear. He got into his old sedan, the document's contents seared into his mind. He had to go home, he had to act normal. But as he drove through the sleeping city, one thought echoed louder than all others. She would find out it was him. It was only a matter of time. And when she did, the offer wouldn't be a threat, it would be a deal. For the next 24 hours, Michael moved through his life like a ghost. He dropped Chloe at school, his smile too tight, his eyes constantly scanning the street. He went to the grocery store, counting out cash for milk and bread, while the numbers from the audit report, 200 million, 100% variance, echoed in his skull. He called in sick for his shift, something he never did. The building felt like a trap now. He spent the day in his small apartment, jumping at every car door that slammed outside. That evening, as he was helping Chloe with her spelling homework, his personal cell phone rang. The number was blocked. His stomach turned to ice. He let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text appeared from the same unknown number. "Mr. Vale, we need to discuss your future at Vance. A car will pick you up tomorrow at 9 a.m. Be outside your building." It wasn't a request. It was an instruction. The confrontation was no longer a possibility. It was an appointment. The car was a black sedan with tinted windows. It took him not to the Vance Biotech Tower, but to a private townhouse in a part of the city Michael had only ever seen in movies. He was led by a silent man in a dark suit through a minimalist foyer and into a sun-drenched conservatory filled with orchids. Althea Vance stood by a window, holding a tablet. She was dressed not in a power suit, but in expensive, understated casual wear. She looked like a completely different person. "Maury dangerous." "Michael," she said, turning. Her voice was warm, almost collegial. "Thank you for coming. Coffee?" The shift in tone was more disorienting than her fury in the office. This was the version of her that raised billions from investors. Charming, persuasive, human. "I'm fine," he said, standing rigidly in the center of the room. "Suit yourself." She set the tablet down. "I'll get right to it. I believe you came across a sensitive document in my office 2 nights ago, an internal audit draft. It contained some unverified allegations, highly misleading." "I clean offices. I don't read documents." She smiled, a thin, knowing curve of her lips. "Of course, but let's assume hypothetically that you did, and that you might have misplaced it. That document in the wrong hands could cause a lot of harm. It could scare investors. It could hurt the company's stock price. It could cost thousands of people their jobs, people like you, Michael." She picked up a remote and clicked. A flat-screen monitor on the wall lit up. It showed a frozen security camera frame. It was him, in the Vance lobby at 1:10 a.m., pushing his cart toward the executive elevators. Time stamped. "The building has eyes everywhere," she said softly. "We know you were the only person in that office between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. We know the folder was there at 10:45 when I left for a call. And we know it was gone at 1:20 when I returned. The timeline is rather narrow." Michael said nothing. His mouth was dry. "I'm not here to threaten you, Michael. I'm here to make you an offer, a recognition of your discretion." She walked to a side table and picked up a simple white envelope. She held it out to him. "This is a retention bonus for your loyal service. $50,000, cash, no taxes, a down payment on a better life for you and your daughter." He stared at the envelope. $50,000. It was more than he made in a year. It was Chloe's braces. It was a reliable car. It was a safety net he had never known. His hand almost twitched forward. "All I need," she continued, her voice a low, compelling hum, "is for you to return the document, and for you to understand that what you think you read was a mistake. A draft written by a disgruntled former employee who has since been dealt with. That's the story. You stick to it, and this bonus is just the beginning. There's a promotion, day shift supervisor, full benefits, a real future." The bribe was laid out with surgical precision. Money, security, a path forward, all for a lie, all for looking away. He thought of the real data, the hidden server, the patients in the trials who were being sold a false hope. He thought of Chloe and what he would tell her about integrity when she was older. The two thoughts collided, tearing him in half. He didn't take the envelope. "The document isn't a draft," he said, his own voice surprising him with its steadiness. "It's a road map to fraud." Althea Vance's face didn't change, but the warmth in her eyes solidified into something hard and glittering. She slowly placed the envelope back on the table. "I see," she said, the word hung in the air. "That is unfortunate." "People are investing their life savings based on a lie," Michael said, the words tumbling out now. "People are sick, and you're selling them a cure that doesn't work." "You have no idea what you're talking about," she snapped, the charm evaporating. "You are a janitor. You understand cleaning fluid and trash bags. You don't understand drug development or capital markets or the stakes involved here. That fraud, as you call it, is keeping this company alive. It's funding real research. One breakthrough is all it takes, and all of this becomes justified. You think you're a hero, you're a vandal. You're about to smash the only hope thousands of people have. It was a new narrative, one he hadn't anticipated. The noble lie, the greater good. For a second, it almost made a twisted sense. The ends don't justify the means, he said, repeating a phrase his own father, a Union man, had drummed into him. Althea laughed, a short, harsh sound. Spare me the homilies. Let's talk about your means, Michael. You have a daughter, Chloe, right? 10 years old, Lincoln Elementary. She picked up the tablet again, swiped and turned it toward him. It showed a live feed from a security camera pointed at the playground of Chloe's school. Children were running and laughing. Chloe, in her bright blue jacket, was on the swings. Michael's blood turned to slush in his veins. She's a beautiful girl, Althea said, her voice now quiet and deadly serious. It's a dangerous world. A custody dispute could get messy. A single anonymous call to Child Protective Services about a single father working nights, leaving his child alone, it could raise questions. Your brother, who sometimes watches her, has a record, doesn't he? A minor drug possession from years ago, but still, context matters. She was no longer offering a bribe. She was showing him the blade. She had researched his life, found its pressure points, and was now pressing her thumb against them. You return the document, she said, each word a nail. You sign a non-disclosure agreement. You take the money and the promotion. And you never ever speak of this again, or I will dismantle your life piece by piece. I will have custody of your daughter challenged. I will have you blacklisted from every janitorial service in this state. I will sue you for theft of intellectual property so fiercely you will be bankrupt forever. And when you have nothing left, I will still own the truth. Do you understand? Michael understood. He understood completely. The power imbalance wasn't just about money. It was about the machinery of influence, lawyers, private investigators, judges, the media, all of which she could activate with a phone call. His integrity wasn't a weapon. It was a liability. He left the townhouse. The black sedan did not take him home. It dropped him at a subway station 3 miles away. The message was clear. He was on his own now. He walked the rest of the way, the cold air sharp in his lungs. He had to get the document. He had to get it out of the building, but going back to work was a trap. They would be waiting for him. That night he lay awake, the ceiling a blank screen for every catastrophic scenario. At 3 a.m. he made a decision. He couldn't do this alone. He needed someone on the inside, someone who could access the document without setting off alarms. He thought of the only person at Vance who had ever treated him like a human being, Leo, the elderly night security guard on the 43rd floor, a former cop with a grandson Chloe's age. They shared coffee sometimes. It was a risk. A monumental risk, but it was the only move he had. The next evening, before his scheduled shift, he met Leo at a diner far from the Vance Tower. He told him everything. He showed him photos he'd taken of the document's first page with his old cell phone. Leo listened, his face growing graver with each sentence. When Michael finished, Leo stirred his coffee for a long minute. You know what she'll do to you if this goes wrong, Leo said. I know. And you're still doing it. I don't see another way. Leo sighed, a sound of resigned courage. The painting, behind the desk, I know the one. I do a perimeter check of that office every night at 2:30. I can retrieve it, but I can't get it out of the building. The bag checks are too strict now, especially for us. Then don't get it out, Michael said, a desperate plan forming. Scan it. There's a multifunction printer in the copy room on 42. It scans to email. You have the access code. Leo stared at him. That's a digital paper trail. They'll trace it back to the machine, to the time. We'll use a dummy email account. Set it up now. You scan the pages, send them, then put the original back exactly where it was. She'll think it was never taken. It buys us time. It was audacious. It relied on the CEO's belief that the document was still safely hidden, that Michael had been too scared to retrieve it. It was their one chance to get the evidence out without triggering a full-scale retaliation. Leo agreed. The plan was set for that very night. Michael would go to work, perform his duties normally, and be a perfect invisible employee. Leo would make his 2:30 round, execute the scan, and replace the folder. The tension that night was a live wire in Michael's chest. Every creak of the building, every flicker of a light, felt like a detection. He cleaned the lower floors, his ears straining for any sign of commotion from above. At 2:45, his radio crackled. It was Leo's voice, calm, all secure on 43, minor moisture alert in Planter 6, logging it. It was the all-clear signal. The scan was done. The evidence was now in a digital cloud, accessible from a library computer anywhere in the city. Michael allowed himself a breath. Phase 1 was complete. They had the proof, now they had to use it. But as he rode the service elevator down at the end of his shift, a new fear took root. Althea Vance was not a woman who waited passively. She had shown him her playbook: surveillance, intimidation, targeting family. If she suspected he was still a threat, she wouldn't wait for him to act. She would move first. And her next move wouldn't be an offer, it would be an eradication. He stepped out into the dawn, the digital copy of the audit a phantom weight in his pocket. He had the weapon, but he was standing in the middle of a battlefield, and the other side had just declared total war. He needed to get to the authorities, and he needed to do it now. But as he fumbled for his car keys, his phone buzzed. It was a notification from his home security system, a cheap camera he'd installed by his apartment door. The alert read, "Motion detected, front door." The attached thumbnail image was too grainy to make out details, but it showed a dark figure standing on his doorstep at 4 in the morning. They weren't waiting, they were already at his home. Michael's heart stuttered. He threw his car into gear, ignoring speed limits, his mind a riot of panic. Who was at his door? Was Chloe safe? His brother was supposed to be with her. He fumbled with his phone, calling his brother Marcus. It rang once, twice, 5 times. No answer. He skidded to a stop outside his apartment building. The street was quiet, no strange cars. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his janitorial keys already in his hand. He burst through the door to his floor, expecting the worst. Marcus was standing in the hallway, talking to a woman in a sharp pantsuit. He looked annoyed, not scared. "Mike, hey, this lady says she's from the building management company. There's a mandatory emergency inspection for vermin at 4 in the morning." The woman turned. She had a clipboard and a professional, impersonal smile. "Mr. Vale, sorry for the hour. We've had complaints from adjacent units. City code requires we investigate immediately. I just need 5 minutes inside to check the kitchen and bathroom voids." It was a ruse, a transparent, bold-faced ruse to get into his apartment, to plant something or to search for the document. The sheer arrogance of it, using the guise of authority, stole his breath. "You got a warrant," Michael said, blocking his doorway. "This is a contractual inspection, not a police matter," she said, her smile not wavering. "Your lease, paragraph 12, grants access for emergency maintenance. Now, if you refuse, we can begin eviction proceedings for violation of lease terms." Marcus looked at Michael, confused. Jude just let her look. It's weird, but whatever. Michael was trapped. Denying her would trigger an eviction fight he couldn't afford, playing right into Althea's threat to destabilize his life. Letting her in felt like surrender. With a cold knot in his stomach, he stepped aside. 5 minutes. The woman, whose badge read K. Anders, moved with efficient, sweeping glances. She didn't look for rats. Her eyes scanned bookshelves, the space under the couch, the modest desk in the corner. She took photographs with her phone, claiming it was for documentation. After exactly 5 minutes, she left with a curt thank you. The message was delivered. Your home is not a sanctuary. We can enter it whenever we wish. Michael sank onto the couch, his hands shaking. He checked on Chloe, sleeping peacefully in her room, oblivious. He knew then that he couldn't wait. He had to go nuclear now. At first light, he took the digital files to the public library, used a computer to create a new, encrypted email account, and sent the scanned audit document to the only federal agency he knew to contact, the Securities and Exchange Commission. He also sent it to the email tip line of the local newspaper's investigative desk. He hit send, a mix of terror and relief flooding him. The die was cast. The reaction was not what he expected. Silence. For 2 days, nothing. No knock on the door from federal agents, no headline in the paper. The silence was more unnerving than any attack. At work, an uneasy calm prevailed. Leo reported that the folder was still behind the painting, untouched. Althea Vance was a ghost. On the 3rd day, Michael was summoned to the office of the building's chief of operations, a man named Reynolds. This time, it was in the Vance Tower. Reynolds was all bland corporate apology. "Michael, we've had to make some difficult staffing adjustments." Your position, I'm afraid, is being eliminated. Downsizing, it's not performance-related. Here is 2 weeks severance and a release to sign. It was a clean, legal firing, the first formal move. As Michael left the building for the last time, security escorted him. He was officially an outsider. That afternoon, a certified letter arrived. It was from a law firm representing Vance Biotech. It alleged that Michael Vale had been identified as the source of a malicious and false data leak intended to manipulate the company's stock price. It was a preemptive strike, framing him as a market manipulator before he could be seen as a whistleblower. The letter demanded he cease and desist all defamatory activity and preserve all documents for a forthcoming lawsuit. The game had changed. He wasn't just a problem to be bribed or threatened away. He was now a defendant. Then the second shoe dropped. Marcus called, his voice strained. "Mike, I just got pulled over. They said my tail light was out, but then they asked if they could search the car. I said no. They brought a dog. It alerted on my trunk. They found a baggie. Mike, it wasn't mine. I'm clean, I swear." Marcus was arrested for possession. A petty charge, but with his record, it meant violating probation. He was looking at jail time. Michael knew this was Althea's precision strike. Isolate him, discredit his allies, burden him with a crisis. While he was scrambling to find a lawyer for his brother, he couldn't fight her. The pressure was a physical vice. He couldn't sleep. He jumped at every email alert. Then a breakthrough from an unexpected direction. An email arrived in his new secret account. The sender was anonymous, using a relay service. The subject line was, "You're not wrong, but you're not safe." The body contained a single sentence: "Check the metadata on the patient log files. Look for the original timestamps." She didn't just fake the data, she accelerated the timeline. And there was a file attachment, a technical log he hadn't seen before. With Chloe at school, Michael spent hours deciphering the file with the help of online forums. The anonymous tip was correct. The fabricated patient results weren't just better than the real ones, they were dated months earlier than the actual trial milestones. Althea hadn't just hidden failure, she had created the illusion of a faster, more successful trial to meet the deadlines for the stock offering. This was securities fraud of a much more aggressive, premeditated kind. And the attached log had a digital fingerprint. It came from an internal server whose access was limited to only 3 people: Althea Vance, her CFO, and the now disgruntled former head of IT, a man named Ben Cross. Ben Cross, Michael remembered the name from the audit report. He'd been fired for gross incompetence 6 weeks ago, the disgruntled employee Althea had mentioned. He wasn't the author of the lies, he was the custodian of the truth, and he was sending Michael a message. Michael reached out via the anonymous email service. A fraught dialogue began. Ben Cross was scared, living in a motel 2 states away. He confirmed everything. He'd built the mirror server at Althea's direction, but his conscience had crumbled. He'd copied the damning logs before he was fired. He was willing to testify, but only if he was guaranteed immunity. He needed a lawyer. He needed protection. Michael had neither to offer. But he had a new piece of leverage, a corroborating witness from inside the executive circle. This changed everything. It turned his lone stand into a potential case. He forwarded Ben's contact information and the new logs to the SEC address, pleading for action. This time, the silence broke. The next morning, a plain sedan parked outside his apartment. 2 men in nondescript suits approached. They showed him badges. They were from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "Mr. Vale, we need to talk about Vance Biotech, someplace secure." They took him to a nondescript federal building. In a quiet room, they questioned him for 4 hours. They knew about the audit document. They had received his email. They were already investigating Vance Biotech for suspicious trading patterns ahead of the stock offering. Michael's evidence was the missing piece. They wanted everything: the original document, his statement, and an introduction to Ben Cross. This was it, the cavalry. But as the agents laid out the next steps, a chilling caveat emerged. "You understand, Mr. Vale, that while we move forward, the company will not be publicly charged immediately. These investigations take months, sometimes years. You will need to maintain your normal life. You cannot tell anyone, including family, about this interview for your safety." He would have to walk back into the world, holding the secret that could blow it all apart, while the woman who wanted to destroy him remained in power, utterly unaware that the net was slowly closing. It was the most dangerous place to be. He was now a confidential informant, a live wire in a room full of gasoline. He left the FBI office with a disposable, encrypted phone and a code word to use if he felt in immediate danger. He felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. That glimmer lasted until he got home. On his doorstep was a single, long-stemmed white orchid in a simple glass vase. There was no note. It was the same species that filled Althea Vance's conservatory. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement, a reminder: I am elegant, I am patient, and I am still watching you. The federal investigation was a slow-moving glacier. Althea Vance was a scalpel, and she was still pressed against his throat. The race was not over. It had just entered its most lethal phase, a silent war where he had the law on his side, but she held all the power in the world he had to live in. And she was about to make her most devastating move, one that would force Michael to choose between the case and the one thing he couldn't live without. The orchid was a declaration of war. Althea Vance knew the pressure was mounting, but she didn't know the FBI was involved. She was reacting to his continued silence, interpreting it as defiance. And in her world, defiance required a decisive, final response. It came 3 days later. Michael was picking Chloe up from school when a woman in a smart coat approached him on the sidewalk. She introduced herself as Laura Simmons from the Department of Children and Family Services. Her tone was polite, concerned. "Mr. Vale, we've received an anonymous but detailed report regarding Chloe's welfare. Allegations of neglect due to your nighttime work schedule and concerns about unsupervised contact with your brother, Marcus, given his recent legal issues. We are required to open an assessment." Michael's world narrowed to a pinpoint. This was it. The move Althea had threatened in the townhouse, executed with bureaucratic perfection. The assessment would involve home visits, interviews with Chloe's teachers, scrutiny of his every parenting decision. It could take months. It could end in a temporary custody order. The process itself was the punishment. He contacted his FBI handler on the encrypted phone, his voice tight with panic. The agent was calm. "This is a classic countermove. Do not engage angrily. Cooperate fully with the social worker. Be the perfect parent. We will provide character references. But Michael, this accelerates our timeline. We need to move before she escalates further. We're ready to execute a search warrant on Vance Biotech. We need you to retrieve the original physical document from the office. Tonight." It was the most dangerous task yet. The building would be crawling with after-hours security, all on high alert. But the FBI couldn't get a warrant to search the CEO's personal art. They needed Michael to secure the original evidence, triggering the raid. Leo, the security guard, was essential. The plan was set for 2 a.m. That night, Michael approached the Vance Tower not as an employee, but as an intruder. He used his old master key on a loading dock door Leo had disabled the alarm on. The familiar halls felt like a tomb. He took the service elevator to 43, his heart a drum in the quiet. Leo was at his desk, the monitor showing a looped feed of an empty hallway. "You have 12 minutes until the next patrol," Leo whispered. "The painting, it's still there. I checked an hour ago." Michael slipped into the dark office. The city lights painted blue stripes across the floor. He went straight to the large, abstract painting. With careful hands, he lifted it from the wall. There, taped to the back, was the manila folder, Project Chimera. He took it, his fingers trembling with adrenaline. He replaced the painting, making sure it was perfectly aligned. As he turned to leave, the office lights blazed on. He froze, blinded. Althea Vance stood in the doorway to her private lounge, wearing a silk robe. She wasn't surprised. She looked weary and utterly resolved. "I knew you'd come for it," she said, her voice flat. The social worker call was a test. A good father, a terrified father, would have been at home with his child, begging for mercy. "You're here, which means you're not acting alone." Her eyes fell to the folder in his hands. "So, it's the feds then." The SEC tipped them off. Michael said nothing. There was nothing left to say. "You think you've won," she said, stepping closer. "You think this folder is a trophy? It's a receipt for the end of your life. I will spend every dollar I have left to bury you in litigation. I will make sure every news story calls you a disgruntled ex-employee, a liar, a failed father trying to extort a successful woman. You will be unemployable. Your daughter will grow up knowing her father destroyed a company that aimed to cure cancer. How does that feel, Michael?" To be the villain, in that story." Her words were meant to shatter him, but holding the physical proof of her crimes, after all these weeks of fear, they felt hollow. "You built the villain," he said quietly. "I'm just holding up the mirror." At that moment, the quiet of the night was broken by the distant, rising wail of sirens, not one or two, but many. They grew louder, converging on the tower. Althea's head snapped toward the window. Down on the street, red and blue lights flashed, washing the building in pulses of color. Unmarked cars poured into the plaza. The FBI was early. A look of pure, unfiltered fury crossed her face. She moved not at Michael, but to her desk. She grabbed a sleek, silver external hard drive and hurled it with all her strength against the marble edge of her desk. It shattered. She was destroying evidence in real time. "It doesn't matter," she shouted over the sound of splintering plastic. "You have a paper folder. The digital core is gone. You have nothing." But she was wrong. From the hallway, a new voice spoke. "We have the server, Althea, and the sysadmin who managed it." Ben Cross, the former IT head, stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 FBI agents. He looked pale but determined. "The mirror server wasn't in the basement. You had me set it up in your Hamptons house. The warrant covered that too." Althea Vance stared, her defiance crumbling into shock. The architecture of her lie was falling all at once. The agents moved in, reading her rights. As they led her out, she looked back at Michael, not with hatred, but with a kind of bleak, professional curiosity. She had underestimated him. That was the flaw in her calculus. She had seen his job title, his bank balance, his life, and categorized him as a manageable variable. She never saw the man. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The raid made headlines. Vance Biotech CEO arrested 4 massive SECURITIS fraud. The stock offering was cancelled. The company entered freefall. The real trial data was exposed, saving countless patients from an ineffective, potentially harmful treatment. It was the victory Michael had fought for. But the personal war had its casualties. Marcus pleaded guilty to a probation violation and served 45 days in county jail. The DCFS case remained open for 2 grueling months before being formally closed with a finding of unsubstantiated. The shadow of it lingered. Chloe knew something was wrong, that Daddy was fighting a monster, and it scared her. Michael was a public figure now, and public figures are targets. The lawsuits Althea promised materialized, frivolous, aggressive suits meant to drain him financially. He relied on pro bono legal help from whistleblower protection organizations. The media narrative was a battle. Some outlets painted him as a hero. Others, likely fed by Vance's remaining allies, painted him as opportunistic. Through it all, the FBI and SEC built their case. Althea Vance, facing the irrefutable evidence from the physical audit, the server logs, and Ben Cross's testimony, opted to plead guilty to avoid a trial. She was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison. Her CFO received 6. The $200 million fraud was unraveled. And then 6 months after the sentencing, a letter arrived from the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. It wasn't a subpoena. It was an award notice. Under the Dodd-Frank whistleblower program, Michael Vale was eligible for an award for providing original information that led to a successful enforcement action with sanctions over $1 million. The percentage was 15%. Of the $43 million in fines and recovered assets the SEC had collected so far. The number on the page was $6.4 million. Michael read it 3 times. He thought it was a mistake, then a cruel joke. Then he called the number on the letter. It was real. The law that Althea Vance had broken contained, within it, the mechanism for his reward. His integrity, his refusal of her $50,000 bribe, had led him to a sum he could never have imagined. He didn't buy a mansion. He didn't quit working. He paid off every debt. He bought a safe, modest house in a good school district. He set up college funds for Chloe and quietly for Leo's grandchildren. He invested the rest, ensuring a stability he had never known. He took a job with a nonprofit that advocated for corporate accountability, using his experience to help other whistleblowers. One afternoon, a year after the award, he took Chloe to the zoo. As they watched the elephants, she looked up at him, now 11 years old and perceptive. "Dad," she asked, "was it worth it, all the scary stuff?" He thought about the fear, the threats, the orchid on the doorstep, the social worker at the school. He thought about the patients who didn't get the false cure. He thought about Ben Cross, who got his life back. He looked at his daughter, safe, secure, watching him for an answer that would shape her own moral compass. "Yeah, kiddo," he said, putting an arm around her. "It was worth it, but only because we got through it together." The story of Michael Vale, the janitor who exposed the billionaire, became a case study. It proved that the most effective detector of fraud isn't a spreadsheet or an algorithm. It's a human being in the right place at the right time with the wrong thing to lose and the courage not to sell it. He was offered a price for his silence. He refused. And in that refusal, he found a power that no amount of money could ever buy, the power to look in the mirror and in his daughter's eyes and see the same man. Michael Vale's story is not a fairy tale. It's a blueprint, a map of the distance between a simple, terrifying choice in a dark room and the seismic ripple that choice can create. We celebrate the whistleblower after the fact, once the danger has passed and the check has cleared. But we rarely sit in the silence that precedes the storm, the crushing weight of knowing a secret that could ruin you, delivered with a polite offer to make your problems disappear. That is where integrity is measured, not in the grand speech, but in the quiet no whispered to an empty room. For every Michael Vale who becomes a headline, there are countless others who see something wrong from the edges of power. The assistant who notices the forged signature, the accountant who spots the irregular transfer, the factory worker who witnesses the safety override. They stand at the same crossroads, speak and risk everything, or stay silent and carry the weight of complicity. The systems we have, the SEC whistleblower program, the legal protections, exist because of people who chose to speak when every incentive told them to be quiet. These systems are a shield, but they are not the courage. The courage is personal, fragile, and frighteningly human. It is the belief that some lines cannot be crossed, even for a price, because the cost of crossing them is the person you become. Althea Vance saw the world as a series of transactions. People were assets or liabilities. Truth was a variable in a financial equation. Michael Vale, in that moment of refusal, rejected that entire cosmology. He asserted that some things, integrity, truth, the safety of patients he would never meet, exist outside the ledger. His greatest weapon was not the document, but his willingness to be poor, to be threatened, to be vilified, rather than be bought. So what does this story leave us with? Perhaps just a question. In the architecture of our own lives, where are the pressure points? What are the quiet compromises we are asked to make for stability, for peace, for advancement? And at what point does that compromise become a betrayal of others or of ourselves? The world is built and unmade by choices made in unobserved moments. The janitor in the empty office, the driver who stops at the rain-soaked bus stop. It asks us constantly what we will carry and what we will walk past. Michael Vale picked up the burden. He carried it through the storm, and in doing so, he reminded us that the most powerful leverage in any room is not always money or title. Sometimes, it's simply the refusal to look away. If you found value in this story of courage against impossible odds, consider subscribing. We delve into the real-life dramas where ordinary people confront extraordinary power. Thanks for watching.